Hey y'all, welcome back to another doll customizing video. Today we are going to be creating a green moss fairy. Really quick, I wanted to say I'm sorry if there's like a lot of glare in the lighting. It's much earlier than it normally is when I film, and so there's a lot of sun coming through the window. Aside from that though, more importantly, the doll that we are going to be making today. If you guys haven't seen my series of doll customizing videos that I've been doing, I'm making a rainbow of fairies and I'm also tying them to an item in nature that corresponds to that color. So for example, the red fairy was the red berry fairy because a lot of berries are red. And like I said, today is going to be the green fairy, who is also moss themed because moss is a lot of the time very green. So I'm really excited about this one. I think that like moss is just one of those things in nature that is fun to me. I don't know why, I just like moss. That being said, I am kind of nervous because I think that my concept art for this one is maybe one of the ones that I'm less excited about, so I'm kind of curious about how that will translate into doll form. But yeah, I'm just very excited to get into this. The disclaimer that I need to give is that I already had a written one at the beginning, but I am an adult doing this. If you are going to be trying to use any of the techniques that I use in this video, please also be an adult. This is definitely not stuff for kids just because there's chemicals and fumes and sharp edges and stuff like that involved. So please be safe if you are an adult and you want to do any of these things. And if you're a kid, don't do it yet. Wait till you're an adult or ask an adult to help you. But yeah, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's go ahead and start making a green moss fairy.
For this project, I will be using a Cleo Denial doll as a base. As per usual, the first step is to remove her head. The next step is to get rid of her black hair. I start off by using scissors to cut as close to the scalp as I can, and then go in with a mix of pliers and tweezers to pull the remaining hair out from her neck hole. And the last thing to do to prep the doll is to remove her factory face paint. To do this, I use 100% acetone nail polish remover. It is especially tricky to remove her black paint on her scalp, but I persevere. Once she is all cleaned up, I'll be sure to rinse her with warm, soapy water to get rid of any remaining traces of acetone. Then it's time to tackle her ears. One of you guys had suggested removable ears, so that is what I am trying today. I use jewelry wire to form an armature I will be sculpting on top of. Only this time, instead of twisting it inside the neck hole to secure it to the head, I am keeping it loose. This way I will be able to remove the sculpted ears to avoid damaging them when I reattach the head. To sculpt the ears, I use epoxy sculpt. I mix equal parts of A and B and then work on forming the ears. Those of you who have seen my previous doll customizing videos will know that sculpting is not my forte, but I did buy some little tools to try to help me have a slightly easier time of it. Once I am done sculpting, I leave the epoxy for 24 hours to be sure it's cured before I move on with the process. Before I start painting the ears, I remove them and use a pen to mark where they were on the head. This way I have a guideline to make sure I don't accidentally put hair underneath where the ear needs to go. After that, I just use acrylic paint to match the ears as close to the skin tone of the head as I can. It will take several coats, so while I wait for the first one to dry, I also paint green onto her scalp. It isn't the exact shade of hair she will have, but it is close enough, and this way any gaps in the rooting won't be so obvious. Once all of the paint is dry, I go ahead and use pastels to blush both the ears and the head. I wanted to get at least the first step in the face-up done now, since I was already going to have to spray sealant onto the paint. Once I'm done using the pastels, I will don the appropriate protective gear and head outside to use MSC to seal them in. Then it's time to work on hair. I ended up getting a metallic nylon for this reroute solely because it was the best green color I could find. Pretty much immediately it proves to be so much more difficult than non-metallic nylon, so I think I will be avoiding this in the future. But for the green fairy, I persevere. I separate a small bit of hair and then cut the hank in half. This fairy isn't going to have particularly long hair, so this way I can effectively double the amount I have to work with. Then I take a few strands, loop them over my finger, and with a bit of effort get them onto my rerouting tool. Then I just plug it into one of the holes on her head and the first strands of hair are in. Once all of her hair has been rooted, she looks quite puffy, but a wash will fix that. Since the green fairy is going to have bark be the base of her clothing, I am using foam to make that. It will be stiffer than cloth, and therefore it will look more like real bark. I start out by cutting squares roughly in the right size for what I will need, constantly comparing to the doll for reference. Once I have the right size, I go in and cut all of the edges to form a more organic shape. Then I use some of my sculpting tools to poke holes where needed that I will be using later to attach the pieces to the doll. Finally, I use a different wooden tool to make grooves in the foam like the grooves found in some tree bark. After a quick paint job, the pieces definitely look more like bark. In order to string them together and attach them to the doll, I will be using yarn. I thought the colors in this looked reminiscent to moss and would be nice and sturdy to use without looking out of place. I unravel a small piece so that I can have a thinner string to work with and very carefully dip the tip into the melted wax of a candle. This allows the tip of the yarn to harden enough for me to be able to string it through one of the holes I made earlier. This is what the top looks like when it's all tied on. It took a lot of effort, but I still have to do the same to the bottoms before we can add embellishment. You can see that I did leave some very long ties on her bottoms. This is where I decided to change my original idea for her outfit fairly drastically. I'm not sure why, but I thought the idea of her having mossy tendrils kind of forming a train to her bark skirt would be really cute. So I did just kind of wing it here. I have my handy dandy hot glue gun out so that first I can glue her bark choker together and then glue more yarn strands to form the basis for her moss tendrils. I don't end up doing the elaborate sleeves I originally planned on, but I do drape a few strands in a very low off-the-shoulder fashion. Now we get to add what will make her actually a moss fairy. The moss! For this, I am just gluing chunks onto her bark pieces and then also adding bits onto the yarn strands to make them appear less like yarn and more like moss. Please excuse my continuity error, but this is what the outfit looks like when it's all done. Then it's time to give our fairy a face. I have her hair pulled back and protected with an old sock and some sewing pins. I start out by adding a little bit more blushing to her face, and then we will be going straight into painting. Technically. I get my watercolor pencil wet and then use a brush to pull off some color to use on her lips. I could have used paint, but I just liked the color on the pencil and trusted my brush to get into the mold better. Okay, time for actual paint. On my last custom doll, I ended up using almost no pencil on her face due to a few factors, and I actually really liked the process. Generally, I prefer drawing to painting because painting can feel very permanent, but when it comes to doing doll faces, for some reason a brush just feels so much easier. So I start out by blocking out the whites of her eyes and painting in her eyebrows. Next, I start on adding some more details to the eyes. I line them very lightly and add in irises. This time I tried to use a dotting tool to form the irises, and I haven't decided yet whether that's easier or harder than using a brush. There's a little bit less control, but I do think it helped me get smoother lines. From here on out, it's basically just adding detail after detail. I never really know how to narrate the face up part of my custom videos. The face takes so long, so I feel like I should be saying something instead of leaving you guys to relative silence. But I'm just kind of vibing. I do end up giving this fairy pretty thick eyelashes and fairly full eyebrows. I didn't want to put any of the moss on her face, but I thought that this might give the vibe that she has moss clinging to her eyelashes and eyebrows as well. She also gets green freckles, partly because that might also look like moss, and partly because it's very fairy to me to have colorful freckles. And this is how her face turns out. I really do love using just paint. I feel like it looks so good. The last thing to do before assembling her is to make her wings. I saved this plastic panel from a shadow high box so I could use the clear portion to make some wings. I have a paper template that I'm just tracing onto the plastic, and then I cut around it with scissors. I will be using a rotary tool to sand down the plastic closer to the proper shape, which will also serve to make the edges less sharp and therefore less dangerous. Once they are all cut, I use hand sanitizer and a paper towel to get rid of the remaining Sharpie marks. Then it's time to paint them. I do want the wings to have a semi-transparent color, so to try to achieve that, I bought some paints that are meant to be used on glass. They are supposed to work on plastic also, so I thought this would be a good idea. They do end up giving me the transparency I want, but they're so hard to work with. They dry up almost instantly. Not sure if I will be giving these another try. Still though, I feel like the wings ended up pretty good, so that means after some assembly and styling, I can introduce you to Shay, the green moss fairy. I started this video by saying she was one I was slightly less excited about, but I think she turned out really, really lovely. The ears I still haven't nailed. I think that my wire wasn't strong enough to easily be reinserted into the head, so they are a little bit off. But the best thing about this Rainbow Fairy series is that I am learning something new with each doll and experimenting with each doll, and that is such a fun thing for me to experience and share with you guys. It is kind of unfortunate that I ended up finishing this doll while it is winter where I am. As you can see from the photos, there thankfully wasn't snow on the ground, but I waited so long trying to find a day that wasn't wet or gloomy. I had to settle in the end for a day that just wasn't wet. She probably would have photographed a lot better with more greenery around and a little bit more sunlight, but I think she's still rocking this. Do let me know your thoughts on Shay in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed going on this journey with me. If you did, if you could like and subscribe if you aren't already, that would be really helpful. But most of all, I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day or your night or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.